When we think of opera in the United States, most of us imagine institutions such as the Metropolitan Opera House, an institution created in the late 19th century and designed to house performances of an elite art form, dominated by the works of European composers sung in foreign languages. While such venerable institutions surely have played a significant role in the history of opera in the United States, there have always been competing means and settings for the delivery of opera, some of which challenge the supremacy of foreign language opera. The histories of such art forms have been neglected. Only now are scholars beginning to seek out a more complete picture of opera, from its elite manifestations to the most popular ones. Musicologist Katherine Preston has, in recent years, focused her attention on popular opera in a particular moment in the history of music in the United States, the late 19th century. In her earlier work, Preston showed that both English and Italian language opera were performed widely in the United States prior to the Civil War, but the renaissance of English language opera after the Civil War was almost entirely unknown. In her latest book, Opera for the People, English Language Opera and Women Managers in Late 19th Century America, Preston shows that English translations of European operas were highly popular in post-Civil War America. Such performances proliferated during that period, and they competed with highbrow foreign language opera performances. Moreover, strikingly, Preston demonstrates that women were the driving forces behind this opera for the people. Women acted as managers, business people, performers, and artistic leaders in the world of vernacular language opera, bringing this style of opera to a wide range of audiences. We interviewed Dr. Preston to learn about these remarkable women. She noted that in the period before the Civil War, English language opera was remarkably popular, but there has been a widespread assumption that it disappeared completely after the war.
All right, so how did we get from there, 1860, where opera is pretty much ubiquitous, and English opera in particular is extraordinarily popular, it's basically popular culture. How do we get from there to where we are today? Opera today is considered like an esoteric art form. It's enlightening, it's uplifting, it's educational, it's certainly not popular culture. So that's what I set about to work on my most recent book, which is called Opera for the People. And I went back and I looked at the history books, and there's no mention at all of English language opera companies in the second half of the 19th century. There's a discussion of the Italian companies and the German companies and the founding of the Metropolitan in 1883. Nothing about English language opera. They just disappeared. So, okay, there's my topic. I will look at English language opera companies. So that's what I started doing. I found out that the histories were all wrong. There's lots of English language opera companies, and at the same time, I discovered that the most popular opera companies were run by women, which I thought was really interesting because our stereotype of women in the 19th century is they're in the home, they're supposed to be holding down the fort, they're the moral authority, they're not out in the big bad world, and yet these women who were on the stage were actually working very hard, and they were managing their companies. So it became a dual focus. That's how I got into it.
One of the first women who rekindled the interest in English language opera after the Civil War was Caroline Richings, an actress who became an entrepreneur and the manager of a significant opera company. She called herself a directress. Richings was a pioneer in business and in the performing arts, and both of these areas proved crucial to Richings' realization of her full artistic potential.
In 1865, a singer named Caroline Richings, who was an actress, not a trained operatic singer, but she sang in English language opera. She said, I don't want to perform in Italian opera. I don't want to have to learn Italian. I want to do what I was doing before the war. I'll just make my own company because I think the critics are wrong. There still is an appetite for English language opera. And so she made a company. This is like 65 or 66, she gathered some singers together, she went on the road. The critics who actually liked Caroline Richings said, "Oh, Caroline, you're just digging yourself into a hole." Well, they were wrong, and she was right. And she actually kind of jump-started an English opera renaissance in the second half of the 19th century. And she set the stage for other women who would then follow in her footsteps. So that's kind of setting the stage for what I talk about in this book, is what these prima donnas, and some of them were just business women, were doing. They realized that they couldn't compete with the Italian singers, because part of the mystique that the wealthy created around Italian opera, Italian language opera, is the fact that they had all these really, really dynamite singers from Europe. And that mystique was part of their appeal. So it was not only expensive, and you had to wear the right kind of clothes, opera cloaks and opera gloves, but they had all these major singers from Europe. Now, the English-speaking singers, especially American singers, they couldn't compete with that. So they saw a niche, that is English language opera, and they said, all right, we'll do it on our own, and we'll create these companies, and they succeeded in doing so.
Numerous other women followed in Ritching's footsteps, creating opera that was accessible to a wide public audience rather than to the elite upper classes who continued to favor European opera, mostly performed in Italian. However, the financial panic of 1873 put expensive foreign language opera performance on unstable ground, as the wealthy patrons of European opera in the United States became unable to sustain it as they had before. In a curious turn of circumstances, new opportunities arose for companies specializing in popular English language opera. One woman whose fortune changed because of the Panic of '73 was Clara Louise Kellogg. Kellogg had long been in competition with European singers, and before the panic her fortunes looked quite low. However, as Preston explains, this changed.
The Panic of '73 followed this incredible prosperous period during the postbellum period. From 1865 to 1873, there's a period of great prosperity. There's money. People have extra time. They have extra money to spend. There is also an explosion in entertainment. After the war, people wanted entertainment. They wanted speakers. They wanted theater people. They wanted drama. They wanted opera. They wanted all sorts of things. And so this is a perfect time period for opera companies. The Panic of '73 occurred in September '73. It was because all of the banks were overextended from both the Civil War and Reconstruction and all the building the railroads and all this kind of stuff. And the Italian language opera companies, there were two major ones in New York at the time. Both of these impresarios failed to hire Clara Louise Kellogg because of her previous year's experience. But they had mega stars, and their contracts were extraordinarily expensive, and they were set to have this incredible season. And then the panic hit in September, and the bottom fell out of the opera market, period. Things were just going, within 6 months, 20% of the American workforce was out of work. It was just, unemployment was awful. It lasted for years in the 70s, and in the middle of the country lasted, the depression that followed lasted until the late 1880s. It was a major, the most drastic economic downturn in the country's history up to that point. Okay, so American middle-class people who before the war had been happy to go to Italian language opera, and in this prosperous period were happy to go to Italian language operas, had been getting turned off by the wealthy people who were putting all these aristocratic trappings onto foreign language opera. They were getting bored with that, and they didn't much like it. They thought it was quite un-American. So when the panic happened and the Italian language opera companies couldn't lower their prices because of all the contracts they had, the middle class basically just turned their backs on Italian opera. Now, that's a problem because Americans for generations had been supporting opera. They liked opera. They danced to opera. They listened to it in the parades. They listened to it in concerts. The solution, here comes Clara Louise Kellogg with her English language opera company, following in the footsteps of Caroline Ritching's Imperepa Rosa. And so Kellogg, the Kellogg Grand English Opera Company, made money hand over fist for the entire duration of the 1870s until about 1878 when she decided to go back into Italian opera. All of the Italian companies went bankrupt. Every single one of them went bankrupt. They could not make a season until 1878. So for that 5-year period, Kellogg, with English language opera, is creating or reinforcing an audience for Italian, French, German, and English opera sung in the vernacular, sung in English.
Effie Ober was another important leader in the world of English language opera, and was actually a businesswoman who ran her own musical management firm. Since many late 19th century Americans were distrustful of women active in the world of business, she had an uphill battle to fight. Yet Ober was a tireless advocate for the artists who worked with her, creating a management bureau that allowed them to advocate for their needs.
So here's Effie Ober. She's in her 20s, and she's contacting all of these people. She decides at some point that she's going to create her own management firm, but she's going to focus on musicians because she has a lot of people, a lot of singers who are in her stable of performers. So she decides to create a management bureau, not a lecture bureau, a concert bureau. And one of the impediments that she had to deal with is the fact that many people were suspicious of women on the stage or women business people. So instead of creating her own, the Effie Ober Lecture Bureau, she decided to create it using the name of a man named James H. Roberts, who was a factory owner in Boston, who had been one of these people who was the chair of a lecture committee who had been contacting people like Effie Ober to book performers. She knew him, and for some reason he let her use his name. So that got past the idea of women should not be in business. The other impediment that a woman who's starting up a business had was capital. If you wanted to start a business, you needed capital to buy equipment. You either had to be independently wealthy or had somebody lend it to you. They had problems getting banks to lend this money to them. So that's a problem. It's a major impediment. Well, the capital for a management firm is know-how, familiarity, a list of people you've worked with, and Effie Ober had been working on that since 1872. So when she started this firm in 1876, she hid behind the name of a man, but she was able to create a very successful business by the fact that she'd been innovative and had been working very hard within the industry itself, and she had capital that she could spend. So 1879. The Boston Theater approaches Effie Ober and says, we want to end our season with a splash. We want to go out with a big splash. We end, in April, this 2-week season. Would you mind putting together a company that will perform HMS Pinafore, which had been premiered in America in Boston the previous November 78. So she said, okay, I'll go to my singers, most of whom are opera singers. They're not theater people. They're not actors and actresses. They're opera singers. She puts together the show. It's supposed to be a 2-week season. It goes on for 6 weeks instead of 2. They estimated that some 100,000 people watched this performance over the course of the 6 weeks from all over the New England. They were having special trains coming into Boston to go to see this show. And it was extraordinarily successful. And so the singers decided they wanted to stay together as an opera company, and they spent the summer trying to convince Effie Ober to do that, and they finally did. So she became the manager of the Boston Ideal Opera Company.
A final case study is Emma Abbott, a singer trained in New York City, Milan, and Paris, specializing in Italian opera. Upon her return to the United States, she created the Emma Abbott English Opera Company. Again, the public adored her in performance, but many church-going Americans, especially in the Midwest, were skeptical of her as a woman on the stage, as the profession of performance was still associated with low morals. Yet Abbott was a devout Christian, as Preston recounts.
There is a wonderful story, and it's not apocryphal. The newspapers are full of this story. 1887, she and her company are in Nashville, Tennessee. Okay, brand new theater opened called the Vendome Theater. The Emma Abbott Grand Opera Company opened up the theater. They were the first performers. Now, companies never performed on Sundays. They would perform Monday through Saturday. Sunday was travel day, and the theaters weren't open on Sundays anyways. So Sunday morning, Abbott every Sunday morning would walk out of the hotel where she was staying, turn either left or right, and the first church she would come to, she would go to the service because she was an upstanding Christian woman. She had a monogamous marriage. She was very happy. Anyway, so she ends up at a Methodist church in Nashville, okay? There was a new minister. The new minister was absolutely aghast at the fact that a new theater had opened in town, and a lot of his parishioners had been there, and he spent the entire time giving his sermon berating them about the evils of the stage and the evils of women on the stage, and they can't do this. You draw a line in the sand, and you're either a Christian or you're going to the theater. Abbott is sitting in the back listening to all this. And after the sermon was over, she got up. I don't know how she did this. She had no problem with charisma. She got up and she said, I have spent 17 years in the theater as an upstanding Christian woman. And there are bad people in the theater and there are good people in the theater. And there are bad ministers and there are good ministers. And then she sat down. And oh my God, things erupted. And the newspapers were full of this. They interviewed her afterwards. She said, I have all these women in my company who are the sole support for their families back in New York, and they send all their money home. If that isn't Christian living, what is?
As Katherine Preston has shown, English language opera would not have flourished in the late 19th century United States if not for the women who worked as managers, performers, and entrepreneurs. Defying conventions and working around the obstacles that they encountered, these women cultivated an art form that merits study, attention, and listening.